Welcome, everyone, to this workshop about the legal gaps that are killing your round before it starts. Over the next 40 to 45 minutes, we will be discussing something founders love to hear: legal. I know. Founders and startups are all about innovation, disruption, AI, venture capital, and somehow you're here in a legal workshop. Maybe that already feels like a red flag in your startup journey or not. For those who don't know me, I'm Rui, founder of Nova Legal. And for the last years, I've been working with startups across fundraising, structuring, scaling, and increasingly operational chaos. And after seeing enough data rooms, founder dynamics, and cap tables, you start realizing something. Most founders don't ignore legal because they are irresponsible. They ignore it because deep down they believe they are building the future. And when you believe you're building the future, law starts feeling old, slow, bureaucratic, friction. Silicon Valley has basically spent 20 years or so trying to speed run civilization. And honestly, sometimes I get it. The problem is eventually reality shows up. And usually during due diligence. And suddenly the cap table is messy, nobody knows who owns what, founder expectations were never documented, contracts are scattered across emails, customer data went into random AI tools, and even that advisor that owns 7% for one intro back in 2021 or so. And then everyone starts having the same conversation. We should probably organize this. And usually 6 weeks too late. That's the real point of this workshop. Because, most rounds don't collapse because the startup is bad. They collapse because trust starts eroding quietly, progressively, internally. Founders often think legal is about protection. And at this stage, legal is mostly about signal, a signal of maturity, of clarity, of operational discipline. Signal that this company can scale without chaos. So actually, this workshop is not about becoming more legal. It's about becoming more investable. So this is not a legal talk. It's a trust talk. And that distinction matters because if this were only a legal talk, we would spend the next minutes talking about documents, contracts, clauses, and compliance. We're not going to do that. We're going to talk about what investors, operators, and founders are actually reacting to when something feels off. Most of the time, they are not reacting to one missing document. They're reacting to ambiguity, like who owns what, who decided what, who can commit the company, where's the real version of this agreement, what happens if that person leaves, what exactly are we allowed to do with this data. Those, as you can see, are trust questions before they are legal questions. So, moving on. Technology changes fast. Markets change fast. Entire industries disappear fast. But law changes differently because law is not software. Law is social infrastructure. It governs ownership, money, employment, investment, accountability, relationships, your marriage, and conflict also. You can dislike it, criticize it, try to move faster than it, but you cannot build a lasting company pretending it does not exist. Now, legal is not the enemy, chaos is. The startups that win are not necessarily the ones avoiding legal. they're the ones operationalizing clarity earlier. Because legal at its best is not bureaucracy, it's trust, structured trust. And investors fund trust long before they fund perfection. Most startups don't collapse because one catastrophic mistake. It's usually small layers of disorder, tiny things nobody prioritizes, conversations nobody formalizes, decisions nobody documents, until one day someone important starts asking questions. And usually that someone is an investor. So inside the startup, everyone understands the context, why that advisor got equity, why the contractor never signed, why the founders never discussed vesting, and why my customer data ended up in random AI tools, why my cap table became emotional. But investors do not invest in context, they invest in clarity. And clarity becomes extremely important the moment money enters the room. So let us talk about the 5 most common trust killers I keep seeing in startups. And notice the language, not legal mistakes, not compliance failures, trust killers. Huge difference. So, trust killer number 1. The startup is growing. The founders stop aligning. When I say founder misalignment, I don't mean people screaming at each other in board meetings. I mean silent misalignment, the dangerous kind, the kind where everyone is still polite, still optimistic, still posting that team photo on LinkedIn or Instagram, but underneath that, people have started building different companies in their heads. So most founders think alignment means we like each other. That's not alignment. Ownership is not just percentages, it's narrative. Why does this person owns 25%? What did they actually contribute? Is the cap table reflecting reality or just history? Roles matter because early stage startups often confuse flexibility with ambiguity. Everybody does everything until nobody knows who is accountable for anything. So commitment matters because one founder may be all in while another is strategically exploring different opportunities. And investors spot that immediately. Vesting, for instance, matters because dead equity kills motivation incredibly fast. For sure, nothing destroys energy like someone owning 20% while contributing emotionally through Instagram likes. And vesting is not punishment, it is continuity protection. Now, decision making matters because founders avoid difficult conversations early, then pay for them under pressure. Hiring, fundraising, salaries, pivots, exit. You don't need bureaucracy, but you do need decision architecture, decision governance. And endgame matters because one founder may want independence, another hypergrowth, another acquisition, another stability. Those are completely different companies. And misalignment compounds under pressure. Pressure does not create itself misalignment, it exposes it. And the stronger the startup grows externally, the more dangerous internal ambiguity becomes. So, yes, of course, friendship creates momentum, but alignment creates durability. And if founder dynamics are the emotional infrastructure of a startup, the cap table is the economic infrastructure. Some investors can read a cap table almost like a psychological profile, because it actually tells the story of every decision the company made under uncertainty. So let's move to trust killer number 2. Your cap table tells a story, and usually a very emotional one. You can almost reconstruct the startup's entire survival journey from the cap table. The optimistic phase, the panic phase, the friend of a friend phase, the we needed this intro or they'll introduce us to big clients phase, the random advisor phase. None of this happens because founders are stupid. It happens because early stage companies optimize for speed, which makes total sense until structure starts mattering. So that equity is one of the most demotivating things inside startups. Someone leaves after 8 months and still owns enough equity to emotionally destabilize everyone for the next 8 years. Cap tables remember decisions long after relationships change. And advisor equity is another true classic. One intro, 3 calls, some strategic guidance. Founders massively underestimate how expensive small percentages become later. Safes, for instance, feel invisible in the beginning. That is why founders actually love them until everyone converts at the same time and the dilution becomes educational, also fragmented ownership. It creates its own problem. Investors start asking uncomfortable questions like, why does this person owns 2%? Who is this? Are they still involved? And the worst answer in due diligence is usually, it's complicated. Some cap tables are not financially structured. They are emotionally structured. Guilt, friendship, urgency, fear, dependency, survival moments, and emotional decisions create long-term structural consequences. So every single line in your cap table is actually a past decision investors now need to understand. That is why clean cap tables create confidence, not because investors love spreadsheets, even if they do, but because clarity reduces uncertainty. And uncertainty changes valuation conversations very quickly. A good cap table actually is not optimized for today. It's optimized for future flexibility. But there's another question investors eventually ask, a very uncomfortable one, perhaps. Does the company actually owns the thing it is building? And surprisingly often, the answer is most of it, which is not exactly the level of certainty investors are looking for. Moving on to trust killer number 3, who actually owns the thing? Founders usually assume ownership is obvious. We paid for it, we built it, it's our product, but ownership becomes surprisingly blurry inside startups, especially fast-moving ones. So, many startups build their MVP with freelancers, completely normal. The problem is that paying someone does not automatically transfer ownership, especially across jurisdictions. So now investors are asking, can the company legally exploit the core product? And suddenly everyone starts searching old emails. Pre-incorporation code happens constantly. A founder starts building before the company exists. That makes total sense. But if ownership was never transferred into the company, the startup's perhaps most important asset may legally sit outside the startup itself. The same thing happens with agencies, design studios, and external creative teams. Founders assume that if the invoice was paid, ownership transferred. That assumption becomes expensive surprisingly fast. Open source is incredible, but startups sometimes consume it without understanding the obligations attached to it. And now AI makes the entire ownership discussion even more complex. Like generated code, generated images, generated contracts, content, generated workflows. Who owns what? What was trained on what? What enters the product layer? What enters the customer layer? Most startups still don't fully know, which is understandable. The technology is evolving faster than the operational maturity around it. And sometimes the startup technically owns the product, but the ex-founder still owns the passwords. And suddenly governance becomes very, very real. So investors do not invest in assumptions, they invest in certainty, especially around ownership. Because if ownership is unclear, everything else becomes unclear, like licensing, acquisition, enforcement, the scalability, the defensibility, for instance, the valuation of the startup. The product may work perfectly, but structurally, the company becomes fragile. So, early stage ownership hygiene is not about bureaucracy. It's about reducing ambiguity around your most valuable asset, because growth amplifies structure, including a weak one. And nowhere is this happening faster right now than with AI. Getting to trust killer number 4 about AI, because everyone is using AI, but almost nobody has operational clarity. The problem is not AI adoption. The problem is unmanaged AI adoption. AI is entering startups faster than governance, than process, than documentation, honestly, faster than common sense sometimes, which is, again, completely understandable. No judgment. Founders optimize for leverage, and AI is probably the biggest leverage tool we have seen in years. The issue is that startups are scaling AI usage before defining boundaries. AI ambiguity actually looks like someone uploading customer information into a public AI tool because they're trying to move faster. No bad intention, no malicious behavior, just operational acceleration. But now the startup has created exposure nobody internally fully mapped. For instance, AI-generated code is becoming normal. The problem is that many startups are integrating generated code without visibility over origin, dependencies, security, or reproducibility. And under pressure, speed tends to win over traceability. Then there's shadow AI. Employees are already using AI tools internally, whether leadership formally approved them or not, because productivity always finds a way. The organization thinks AI adoption is centralized. In reality, it's already decentralized. And then comes the beautiful moment where founders start generating contracts with ChatGPT or Claude. That's not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is when nobody reviews them. AI dramatically lowers execution friction, but it also lowers reflection friction. And startups can accidentally operationalize bad decisions much, much faster. So The biggest AI risk today is actually false confidence, because AI makes startups feel more capable very quickly, sometimes even more capable than they actually are. False confidence scales operational mistakes incredibly fast. The issue is not the technology, it's the absence of that operational clarity around the technology. So the minimum AI governance for early stage startups moves around approved tools, internal usage or boundaries, customer or sensitive data rules, the review of legal and commercial outputs, also tracking of AI generated production code, clear accountability, and early team education. This is not about slowing things down. It's about preventing invisible operational debt. The startups that actually win with AI will not be the ones using it recklessly. They will be the ones integrating it intelligently. And this connects all the previous problems: founder tension, messy ownership, unclear documentation, AI ambiguity. They are usually not isolated failures. They are accumulated layers of unresolved decisions. And so we get to our final trust killer, number 5. And startups have a name for this in engineering: technical debt. What most founders don't realize is that companies also accumulate operational debt. And one dangerous form of it is what I like to call legal debt. In the beginning, it feels harmless. You postpone structure, you skip some documentation, you improvise agreements, you centralize information in certain people, you optimize for speed, which is how startups actually survive early on. The problem is that such debt compounds silently. Every startup eventually reaches this magical operational phase where nobody knows where the latest version of anything is. Google Drive, Notion, Slack, Dropbox, email attachments, desktop folders called final version 7 real final. And somehow everyone still believes the company is organized. Startups also make extremely important decisions in extremely casual ways, especially in Slack, right? Which is efficient until 6 months later when nobody remembers what was actually decided. Institutional memory becomes fragmented surprisingly fast. And one of the biggest hidden risks in startups is when critical knowledge lives only inside people's heads, usually founders, one operator, or lawyers. And then there is approval logic. Who can sign what? Approve what? Commit the company to what? If the answer is we usually figure it out, you're already accumulating operational fragility. So it's very common that the company confuses access to people with access to knowledge. But those are completely different things. You may have access to a founder, you may have access to a lawyer, you may have access to the one operator who always remembers everything. But that doesn't mean the company has access to knowledge. Scalable companies need institutional memory, not dependency architecture. So that compounds quietly. Remember that. Usually until pressure arrives. Suddenly, the company needs clarity, traceability, consistency, and accountability, and it needs it immediately. But operational maturity cannot be improvised overnight. So, in the end, the goal is not perfection. Again, the goal is operational clarity. Early stage startups will always operate with some level of chaos. That's normal. The problem is unmanaged chaos, because unmanaged chaos destroys trust internally, operationally, financially, eventually externally, especially when investors start looking deeper. Most companies still treat legal as an external emergency function, something you call when fundraising starts, when conflict appears, when enterprise clients ask questions, or when something already went wrong. That made sense for a different era, not in today's world. Modern startups move too fast, operate too globally, and scale too much complexity for legal to live outside the operating system. This is the shift I personally think matters most. The future is not more legal, it's embedded legal intelligence. So, moving on, and about this embedded legal intelligence, I don't mean replacing lawyers with ChatGPT or Claude. That's not my point. The point is that legal intelligence in such way needs to live inside the company and the business, not exclusively inside a lawyer's head, not trapped in inboxes or scattered across PDF or Google Drive folders, not remembered only by the person who was there when the decision happened. And no, legal should not live inside your lawyer's head. That model doesn't scale anymore. The future is not more documents, more friction, or more external dependency. The future is accessible context, operational clarity, integrated workflows, and legal intelligence embedded into the business itself, not replacing lawyers, evolving the role they play in the business. So, before we close, I want to turn this into a private assessment. So, for each dimension, give yourself a quick green, yellow, or red. Do not write what sounds impressive. Write what would, in your approach, survive due diligence. You'll probably know the answer faster than you want to admit. So, first, founder alignment. Are roles between founders actually clear? Are decision rights clear? Does everyone understand vesting? Are expectations documented or just emotionally assumed? Have you talked between each other about the end game, the exit? Green would mean that the company can explain this calmly to an investor. Yellow means the founders have talked about it, but it mostly lives in your memory. Red means the conversation is still implicit, sensitive, or completely avoided. Take a few seconds and score it. Act like enemies to stay friends. Alignment is actually not a soft topic. Again, it's operational infrastructure. Second, ownership and equity structure. Do you understand the story your cap table tells? Can you explain every line? Have you modeled the dilution, simulated it? Is advisor equity controlled and justified? Is there room for future hires and future fundraising? Green would mean your cap table creates confidence. Yellow meaning it's understandable internally, but not yet investor ready. And red means it contains emotional decisions you hope nobody asks about. Score it, but remember, your cap table is not just ownership. It's actually future flexibility. Third, product and IP control. Does the company clearly own what it's building? Are contractor, freelancer assignment signed? Was pre-incorporation work transferred? Do you know what open source obligations exist or how AI generated assets enter the product or brand layer? Green means ownership is documented and accessible. Yellow means that you think it's fine, but still need to verify it with somebody. Red means ownership depends on assumptions, old emails, or goodwill. If ownership becomes blurry, scaling becomes fragile. Fourth, AI and data boundaries. Do people know which tools are approved? Do they know what data cannot be uploaded? Is there a human review layer for legal, commercial, or at least customer-facing outputs? Do you track AI-generated production code? And is anyone accountable for this? Green means AI usage is intentionally governed, okay? Yellow means leadership has some good instincts, but the team has no clear map. And red means everyone is using whatever works. The goal here is not controlling AI. It's preventing uncontrolled operational risk. Moving on. Fifth, institutional memory. Where do your documents, your important documents live? And your decisions? Can someone new understand what was agreed, approved, or promised without asking three different people? Can the company access knowledge or only the people who remember it? Green means information is structured, searchable, usable. Yellow means the company can find it, but only with human archaeology. And red means knowledge is trapped in somebody. Memory, remember, doesn't scale. Systems do. Now, sixth, the diligence readiness. If a serious investor asks for due diligence materials next week, would the process increase trust or drain it? Do your documents tell one coherent story? Does governance make sense? Is ownership logic crystal clear? Are gaps visible and being handled? Green means diligence would verify the trust we're looking for. Yellow means diligence would create work, but not panic. And red means diligence would become the first time the company actually discovers itself. Diligence, remember, is not where trust is created. It's where trust will be verified. Look at your 6 scores and don't overcomplicate this. I would say that your next legal priority is probably not the most complex legal topic. I would say it's the weakest area where the company is actually relying on memory, assumptions, or informal alignment. That's where trust will break first under pressure. And actually, the goal is not to fix everything at once. The goal is to first stop pretending that unclear things are harmless just because they have not exploded yet. And the goal is not becoming more legal. The goal is actually becoming more resilient because resilient companies move faster, they raise funds better, they hire better, they can negotiate better, survive pressure better, because clarity compounds. The founders who struggle most with legal usually meet it too late. The founders who use it well turn it into operational leverage. Again, insisting, not bureaucracy. a competitive advantage. Ultimately, investors are not just funding a product, they are funding the company's ability to scale behind it. Beyond it, I mean, trusts under pressure. And that starts much earlier than most founders think. Not when the term sheet actually arrives, not when the data room opens, not when the first conflict appears. Now, build trust before you need it. Thank you so much for attending, and I will be happy to connect with you all after this. It was a pleasure to be with you during this workshop. Thank you.